Welcome, Gunrunner.
The glory days of the video game arcade might be a long way behind us, sadly, but they certainly haven't been forgotten, and in this video I'm going to take you back over 30 years to those heady days that played such an important part in our youth. The year is 1988, and we're all present at one of the greatest times in coin-op video game history. You won't find any fruit machines, penny pushers or fixed prize machines here. These are the true arcade classics that lit up dingy smoke-filled rooms and sat on stained carpets whilst they delighted audiences and drained people's pockets of all their spare change. Names like Sega, Atari, Konami, Taito and Capcom have all become synonymous with gaming, so it would be no surprise to see them feature heavily in this video. This is where many of today's popular franchises started, multiple innovations took place, and the genres that we all know and love today were formed. All these titles play every bit as well today as they did back then and deserve to be remembered as true classics in the annals of video game history. This was an extremely strong year for arcade games, arguably one of the best, and I had to leave out a surprising amount of titles that I really wanted to include. So I'm going to do something that I don't usually do in these videos and mention some of the games that I had to leave out. Quite a few of them in fact. So here we go. Atomic Robo Kid, Cyberball, Dead Angle, Dynamite Ducks, Fantasy Zone 2, Galaga 88, Lead Storm, Ninja Spirit, Splatterhouse, Superman, Super Contra, Truxton, Vigilante, Vindicators, Vulcan Venture and Wonder Boy 3. In fact, I could have easily made two separate videos for this year, so I'm sorry if I left one of your favourites out. This really was the hardest to pick greatest arcade games video I've ever put together. Now let's get on with the ones that did make it. Blasteroids is the proper sequel to Atari's legendary Asteroids, as Asteroids Deluxe was more of an update of the original than a new game. And what an update this is too. It takes the core gameplay and adds everything you'd expect from a shoot 'em up in the late 80s. We now have huge bosses, power-ups, different levels, and even the ability to change ships. The last of these is perhaps the most unique feature. You can now swap your craft between three different types: Speeder, best speed, Fighter, best firepower, and Warrior, best armour. Blasteroids is a criminally underrated game. The Ninja Warriors was particularly notable upon its release for featuring 3 screens across its cabinet. This was the same system that had been used previously in both Darius and Buggy Boy, with your main sprite appearing in the middle and the 2 side screens being used to see enemies approaching and your overall surroundings. A single plane scrolling beat 'em up for 1 or 2 players to play the part of a robotic ninja on a mission to save the world from a tyrannical warlord. There's no doubting that the gameplay here is fairly limited, but the pure wow factor wins out. It's not often that movie games make it into the arcades, mainly due to the long development times involved in them. But one really notable example is Robocop. Given the subject matter of the film, it was always going to make a perfect video game, and indeed Ocean's home computer game proved to be a huge hit, with Data East sub-licensing from them to create this coin-op. So with that in mind, you won't be surprised to see that this borrows much of the gameplay from those versions, with run and gun style levels interspersed with cool little mini games to help you get your breath back. The original game, Ghosts and Goblins, was notorious for its difficulty, so the first thing I should probably mention is that this game is every bit as rock hard as its predecessor. However, the first game was a massive success, so fans of it will be pleased to hear that Ghouls and Ghosts is basically more of the same. We once more take on the role of the brave knight Arthur, and this time he's on a mission to restore the souls of his friends that have been stolen by Lucifer himself. You must battle your way through haunted woods, spooky caves and scary castles, taking out the endless streams of enemies. This massive arcade hit was also the game that was originally given away free with Sega's own Mega Drive console. It's a fantasy-styled scrolling beat 'em up on one plane, where its key gimmick is the ability to transform from a human to different types of monster by collecting magical orbs left behind by golden balls. As a human you have a limited range of punches and kicks, but with every magical orb you go stronger until you transform completely. Then you can use your far more powerful magical attacks to defeat the undead enemies and bosses. Rise from your grave! Perhaps my favourite thing about this coin-op is the bizarre name. The story goes that somebody at Taito mistranslated the name, as it should have in fact been called Continental Circuits. This rumour also holds water when you see that many of the cabinets out there use the proper name on the artwork. Silly name aside though, what we have here is a really solid F1 style racer. We must not only beat the other cars, but also make it to the checkpoint in time. One of the features I really love in this game is that your car retains damage, with smoke bellowing out the back whilst you race. Also known as Shadow Warriors in Europe due to negative connotations associated with the word ninja, this is without doubt one of Tecmo's most famous creations. The other interesting thing about Ninja Gaiden is that both the arcade and NES games were in development at the same time, but play completely differently. Whilst the NES title is the more well known and most prestigious one of the two these days, I have always preferred the coin-op. That's because this one takes the form of a more traditional scrolling beat 'em up, which is my favourite arcade game genre. And it plays great too. Japanese coin-op manufacturer Jaleco actually released several different P47 games in the arcades, but this one was by far the most popular in the series. It's actually a rather good, if very unoriginal, horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up with a more realistic than most World War II theme, where you control an American P47 Thunderbolt, the largest and heaviest plane to ever be powered by a single engine. In it you must take out the enemy forces in the air, on the land and in the sea, with both guns and bombs. In my opinion, P47 is a seriously underrated shoot 'em up that deserves a closer look. Given what a huge hit Operation Wolf was for Taito in the arcades, it was only natural that they would follow it up with a sequel, and here it is, Operation Thunderbolt. Following the exact same shoot everything that moves gameplay mechanics from the original, there is only one real difference between this game and its prequel. The levels now scroll into the screen as well as horizontally. The best addition to this sequel, however, is that it can now be enjoyed by two players simultaneously. The small changes do just enough to make this feel like a different game, rather than just another rehash. It's safe to say that Double Dragon 2 is essentially an improved version of the first game, but that's not to say it doesn't add a few more new features of its own. In addition to offering upgraded audio and visuals, new traps, moves and enemy characters, it also changes the control method too. Double Dragon 2 discarded the conventional punch and kick buttons of the original in favour of a direction-orientated attack system similar to the original Technos beat-em-up Renegade. Aside from that, Double Dragon 2 is the same old scrolling beat-em-up formula that we all know and love. Although the name doesn't suggest it, Silkworm is actually a really good horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up with a very neat gimmick. This unique feature is the ability to control either a helicopter gunship in the air or an armoured jeep on the ground. In two-player mode you can each take control of a vehicle and blast away the hordes of air and ground-based enemies at the same time. Each vehicle also has its own advantages and disadvantages. In two-player mode the game also adds some extra gameplay features too. For example, the need for the chopper to protect the jeep in some sections. Out of all the games that came out of Atari's arcade division in the later years, Tubin is easily one of my favourites. It's a game that just sums up what made Atari games so great. It has humour in abundance, heaps of originality and great gameplay too. The name Tubin is basically a play on tubing, a popular pastime in America where people float down rivers on giant rubber rings. But this is far from leisurely as there are crocodiles, angry fishermen, waterfalls, hazardous rocks and fallen trees to contend with. I guess it's good that you kept a few beer cans to chuck at them then, isn't it? Narc was designed by arcade game pioneer Eugene Jarvis and caused a lot of controversy at the time due to its excessive levels of violence and adult subject matter. It also pioneered the use of digitised graphics in arcade games too, well before the same company went on to develop Mortal Kombat. In Narc, you basically just run around each level, blowing the crap out of drug addicts, busting their dealers and collecting all their cash they leave behind to fill your own corrupt pockets. Eventually you'll come face to face with the crime lord himself, Mr. Big, who really lives up to his name. In Taito's wonderful New Zealand story, you're a Kiwi trying to rescue your friends who have been locked in cages under armed guard. You start off with a bow and arrow to battle your equally cute opponents, but can soon upgrade to other weapons. Because poor old Kiwis cannot fly, he must use the balloons to reach some of the higher platforms, but watch out for the lethal spikes. To complete a level you must rescue your buddies and find your way to the exit. New Zealand story became somewhat overshadowed by the Bubble Bobble series over the years, but deserves just as much attention. By the time Powerdrift came along, arcade audiences had already experienced the wow factor of Sega's many superscalar arcade games through titles like Outrun, Space Harrier and Afterburner. But not once to sit on their laurels, Sega decided an upgrade was in order and Powerdrift was one of the first titles to take advantage. The scaling effects were joined by equally impressive rotation effects and less restrictive gameplay that branched off in different directions, as seen here in their multiple road routes. The hydraulic cabinet was also upgraded too, to give one of the most amazing arcade experiences ever. I don't think there's much doubt that Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja is the greatest title of any video game in history. In the game you simply make your way along each stage, defeating the hordes of bad guys until you get to an end of level boss, then rinse and repeat until you reach the end where you must save President Ronnie. You have a limited range of kicks and punches and can also jump to move between the two parts of the playfield and dodge enemy attacks. As well as your standard moves, there are also weapons that can be picked up too, such as nunchuckers and knives. Bub and Bob are back once again, but this time they're in their human form. They're now also armed with beautiful solid rainbows instead of floaty bubbles. In another change in the first game, the levels now scroll, but not horizontally like most platformers. In Rainbow Island you run and jump vertically. You also have to do this very quickly indeed, as water rises constantly from below that will swallow up everything with it, including you, if you don't make it to the top of each stage quickly enough. Rainbow Islands is a truly worthy sequel to one of the greatest arcade games of all time. Released at a time when these kind of target shooters were all the rage, Cabal differs from the norm in that you actually see your character on the screen from a third-person perspective. It also doesn't scroll at all and sticks to single screen levels. One nice feature of Cabal is where you can both destroy and hide behind large parts of the scenery, using it as a shield. As well as a gun, you're also armed with a limited number of hand grenades, which are very useful for dispatching larger enemies. Whilst great when played on your own, Cabal really comes into its own when you add a second player. Without doubt, Trace HQ is one of my favourite arcade games of the late 80s. It was also one of the few video games that my dad loved playing. It was very much of its time and brings back memories of the Lethal Weapon films, Miami Vice and other cheesy cop shows on TV in the 80s. The idea of the game is to get behind the wheel of a high-powered police car, a Porsche 928 to be exact, and take part in a high-speed chase. Once you reach him, you have to use your car to ram him off the road and make the arrest. Choose the right routes, activate those turbos and try your hardest not to cause an accident. By far the most technically impressive superscalar game yet, Galaxy Force 2 is a 3D shooter where you guide your craft through a series of space and planet-based stages that are always followed by a tunnel sequence and a boss. These tunnel sequences were unique to a game of this type, and twist and turn making them hard to negotiate. Thankfully, another very unique feature of this game is the ability to regulate the power of your thrusters, so that you can speed over the planet's surfaces and slow down for the tight caverns. Galaxy Force blew me away when I first played it, and it's still one of my favourite games of all time. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1988. Are there any others you can think of that should have made the list? Or do you disagree with any of the entries I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons who continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Tiago Piero dos Santos Silva, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to a host of extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.